you ask any marketer how effective individual leads and MQLs are at driving closed-won business, deep down nearly everyone will admit not very. Yet many cling to these outdated practices and irrelevant metrics despite the results. Most marketers are being asked to do more, but that has hit diminishing returns. Instead of doing more, isn't it time for companies to look for ways to do something better? Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Revenue Lounge. I'm your host, Randy Likas, and I'm very excited to have Lauren Daly joining me today. Lauren is the Director of Marketing Operations at Palo Alto Networks. Lauren has been a key driver and change agent for one of the most successful go-to-market transformation stories the past 2 years, not just at Palo Alto Networks, but across the B2B tech industry. The work that she and her team has done was awarded the Demand and Account-Based Marketing Program of the Year by Forrester Research in 2025 because of the impact that it has driven at Palo Alto Networks. Lauren, I'm thrilled to have you on the show. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So Lauren, I'd like to usually start these episodes. Maybe you could give us a little bit of background on yourself, maybe your career journey and your current role and responsibilities at Palo Alto.
Sure, yes. So as you said, Director of Marketing Operations, and I am in a global role here at Palo Alto Networks, and we're focused on making sure all the demand gen that our marketing team is gathering gets handed off to sales and actually turns into pipeline that doesn't just sit there and stall out, but closes. And I started out my career in the Silicon Valley, so I'm from San Francisco originally, and started on the channel team. And that was great because I worked a lot with channel sales, and it really gave me that sales point of view and perspective before coming into the marketing team. So when I joined the marketing team at Palo Alto Networks, I actually moved to Amsterdam, and I now live in London, and that's been really helpful too because it gave me a good perspective on how to go to market outside of the Silicon Valley, which is very niche. And in Palo Alto Networks, we're a cybersecurity company, so really helping companies proactively manage their cyber risk. And we're selling complex multi-product solutions, services to customer segments like government, medical, large B2B enterprise orgs, and all of those organizations are making purchasing decisions in a buying group, which is why this topic is so important to us.
Great. So Lauren, I think you began the program, about 18 months ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. And you began with a pilot to move away from individual leads and MQLs as the primary sort of metric in terms of how you measure marketing contributor pipeline, and transition to this opportunity-based marketing motion, otherwise known as buying groups. And we could spend the entire hour just talking about the experience and the journey, but that's really been well documented. You and your team have done a great job speaking at conferences and doing other podcasts. I'd like to ask you about some things that maybe haven't been covered or where the program is heading in its next stage of evolution. That said, I do want to set the right context. And so maybe you could spend 3 to 5 minutes just talking about the journey if you've had over the past 18 months.
Yeah. So we, like many other companies, had either flat or reduced budgets, yet all of our targets were increasing. So we were looking at our funnel and trying to figure out how could we increase conversion rates, but we were just stalled. So we started having a few discussions around buying, but we really didn't have an idea of what the plan could look like to move in that direction. And Jeremy from my team attended the Forrester conference a couple of years ago, and he heard Reltio share their story about how they transformed their funnel from more of a lead-centric individual funnel to thinking more about buying groups. And he came back and he said, okay, here we've got a good roadmap, proven results. We looked at it and we said, yep, let's start discovery on this. We engaged with Forrester, so Terry and Amy from the Forrester side are great analysts that we partnered with to really get going and build our own roadmap for what this could look like.
So what was it about the buying group transformation story that Reltio shared when Jeremy came back and talked to you about that got you really excited and really jazzed?
Well, I think they were showing very good results in terms of higher win rates when buying groups were present, and they had a pretty clear plan for how to do that, which was starting with the BDRs and getting them to just add more people onto the opportunity. And to me, that seemed really simple. Like, we don't need to boil the ocean here. Let's just get going in that direction and see if we can prove out similar results to garner more buy-in from leadership on this transformation.
So Palo Alto is a very big company, a lot of internal stakeholders that you probably need to get alignment from to try something different. Just curious, where did you start? How did you sell this internally? And maybe what were some of the early challenges you had to get that initial alignment?
Yeah, so definitely the biggest challenge is people, the culture shift. People have been doing the same thing around MQLs for many years. And the systems and processes, those are pretty easy to change, but getting people to think differently about how they do things, that's really the tricky part, especially when a lot of their behaviors are driven by the targets that are set. Yeah. So if those need to change, that is also a tricky piece, and that was the case here. So we decided to start with what I call the friendlies. These are the people where they immediately bought into the vision when we shared what we wanted to do, shared some of what Reltio had done, and they said, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, and bought in. So we began working with them first. We definitely had people who were like, well, I like the idea, but I don't know if I'm ready to jump on board yet. And we said, it's fine, you can come at a later date. And that's actually what happened. So once we began seeing positive results with the pilot, we actually had more teams approach us and say, hey, how can I be involved? How can I get my team involved? And then we use those pilot metrics to, again, get that leadership buy-in. And we showed the impact, but not just the pilot result impact, because that was very small. That's where we extrapolated the results by showing, if we rolled this out full scale, what those results would look like in hundreds of millions. And that's really where you start to capture attention quickly.
Yeah, and I've heard you at Forrester earlier this year and also on some of the podcasts share some of those incredible results. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that? What were those?
Yeah, so when Terry and I were discussing this concept of our results, there are three components of it. It's pipeline progression, deal size, and win rates. And I like to invest, and so I'm all about compound interest. And that's where I was like, oh, compound lift. Because if you are able to progress more of your opportunities into a sales rep's forecast, and then those deals are growing, so they're larger deal sizes, and they close out a higher win rate, it's a huge amount of bookings that you get from that, additional incremental bookings that you get from that lift. And so we were seeing opportunities that had a buying group present move into that forecast at 15 times the rate of those with only one person.
Yeah.
And then the deal size was actually a surprise. That went up 2.4x. So over double the deal size when you have a buying group present. And then the win rate, I just pulled this for our last QBR, it was 1.4x. So I think, what is that, like a 40% increase in our win rates when a buying group is present. So it's unbelievable. The results, we were actually shocked. Again, we weren't expecting this magnitude.
Well, and when you have results like that, it makes it easier to sell it in beyond that pilot and get the additional funding that you need and everything else, which is really where I want to go next. So I understand that you and Jeremy have been going out, kind of doing a road show, right, with the different field marketing and campaign teams, not only educating them, but also how can they use the data, right, to help make better decisions. How are you getting them to think differently about how to leverage these buying group signals or data more effectively to hit their targets? I think you used a phrase where you said, we've really got to change that marketing mindset and get them to shift a little bit. Can you talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, so we started out by just explaining that at the end of the day, this makes marketing more valuable to sales, where our marketers are already going after key personas and engaging with them. But we weren't doing a good job of connecting all those signals, those buying group members together and packaging it up in a way that sellers can take action on it. Because the sales team is already doing this. They're already talking to the buying group. So that was the disconnect. And I think once we explained that and then we showed the results, that's where very quickly we were able to sell the vision and get buy-in from the marketing team. The question next was, okay, well then what should we be doing differently to make this shift? And that's taken some time. What we started with is the targeting strategies, because again, instead of just going after your list of personas that you know are important, start thinking more about, okay, am I engaging all these personas that are important? Are we engaging with the complete buying group? What's the level of engagement with each of those personas? So I think you and I could agree that if you have one practitioner, one decision maker, one champion, that's a more valuable group of people than engaging with just 3 or 4 practitioners at the same role.
Absolutely. Yep. I was just going to say, being multi-threaded with one function or one persona doesn't really help increase the chances of alignment for what you're trying to sell in. So if I'm understanding correctly, you've identified who are those key personas that, that we need to have as part of our deals. And when we do, we can probably see win rates going up X%. And when we don't, that's probably where you're coaching the marketing teams to say, how do we go get those folks engaged or involved? Is that accurate?
Exactly, yes. So that's where they're asking us, okay, well, how do we do this? And Demand Base is a tool that we have in our tech stack. Sixth Sense is very similar. And that houses a lot of these signals to understand exactly what you're saying. Like which buying groups are active, where are we missing key personas, where do we have key personas identified, but the engagement is low. And that's really allowing the team to start building target audiences and be a lot more deliberate with their spend to achieve very specific outcomes. I think that another key piece of this is if they're in market with us, or they're in market but we're not engaging with them, then we know that they're likely engaging with a competitor. So that's also a signal to us that, hey, we're probably a little bit behind and we need to go after them immediately.
So I think the way I've heard you and Jeremy talk about this before is in order to distill this information down into something that's easy and actionable, you had to develop a new score, if you like, a buying group score or a buying group completeness metric. Can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yes. So we knew we wanted to help the marketers just really quickly understand where they should be prioritizing their time and effort. There's a lot of different functions within marketing, so paid media may be spending more time with buying groups that are showing high intent, but maybe we're missing those key personas. So they should be going out and trying to identify and engage with those key personas, whereas the buying group that has high intent and we have everybody identified, but maybe it's lower engagement, hand that off to campaigns or field to try to drive up engagement with those key personas. And then the ones that really are not in market, let brands sit there. And that's where you're being a lot more efficient and effective with your spend. So let's not spend a lot of money there if you're a campaigns or field team. And we wanted to, distill this down into a really easy way to identify these cohorts. And that's where we decided to kind of mimic the Gartner Magic Quadrant, where you've got we're looking at kind of just 4 boxes, A, B, C, D, to determine where we're looking at intent, completeness, engagement, and propensity. And we're using those 4 pieces of information to categorize them as A, B, C, D, easy prioritization.
And just out of curiosity, where do those scores live? Do they live inside of Salesforce? Do they live inside of Demand Base? How do the teams go to find these signals?
So our plan is to have them live inside Salesforce. So we're currently working with our IT team to build out a custom buying group object where we can house all these buying group members before an opportunity is created. And then within that buying group object, we have those 4 scores, the completeness, intent, engagement, and propensity. And then those all have an overarching, are they A, B, C, or D? And so we have that overarching score as well. So that's not quite built yet. We're working with our data science team to get that. We've got the requirements all documented. But once that takes place, it'll be much easier for our marketing team. We'll pull that into Demand Base, and it'll be much easier for them to build their audiences quickly. Because right now they're having to piece this together, and there's a lot of information and signal in Demand Base that they're having to pull in as fields and parameters when they're building out their audiences. Once we have this A, B, C, D, it makes that very simple.
Yeah. So I think if I remember correctly, I've heard you say the systems side of things, you didn't have to change a ton for the pilot and the journey. A lot of the existing tech that you had could be leveraged and used, just maybe have to think about how you're designing them a little bit differently. It sounds like the buying group object is probably the biggest system change that needs to happen in this next phase or next evolution, right? But would you say, other than that, is there any other major changes from a systems point of view that need to be made?
No, we really tried to use what our existing tech stack looked like. We tried to use the capabilities that already existed, but we quickly identified where, let's say in Salesforce, a workflow was taking 10 steps. Then we partnered with our Salesforce team to reduce that to, say, 2 steps. And then we were leveraging Lean Data, but Lean Data has a contact to opportunity matching capability, and that hadn't been turned on. So that was another piece in our scaling this out and automating it, where we quickly turned that on, and we didn't boil the ocean there again, where we tried to turn this on for everything. We turned it on for a very small use case, and then we just expanded from there as we saw success.
That's amazing. Now, as you're rolling this out and you're talking to the teams, there's probably some recommendations or some changes in terms of how they should be thinking about how they're measuring pipeline or metrics they should be looking at. I'm curious, what metrics stay the same and what metrics change? And if you can provide a little more context and detail around that.
Yeah, so in my eyes, the top line metric that we want to change and keep reinforcing with teams is increasing the number of opportunities that have a buying group present. So we call that coverage, where we already know they progress into pipeline at a higher rate, higher deal size, higher win rate. So we need more of that. Mm-hmm. And when we started this project, less than 5% of our opportunities had that. Now we doubled that, more than doubled that. So we're at roughly 13%. But you can see how there's enormous upside if we focus on that. So if we could get that to like 20, 30% coverage over this next fiscal year and just increase it from there, that's what we're trying to shift the focus there within marketing. I think also thinking less about MQLs, because that's honestly just an arbitrary threshold we've decided upon. Most companies just decide, oh, this is going to be our MQL threshold. They have to meet this criteria, but that doesn't necessarily align with how, when a seller is like ready to buy from you, and it's only thinking about the individual. It's not thinking about that complete buying group, where you may be missing 3 people who have lightly engaged with you, but you could argue that that's actually more valuable than one person who's just heavily engaged with you. Right. So they're both useful, but with our current, or with the lead-centric funnel, you're missing those and MQL-focused funnel, you're missing those 3 people who have lightly engaged with you, where they could be in market and talking to competitors. Yeah. And so how you're ignoring them and you're not engaging with them. So that's another change that we've been working on. And then when you're running a campaign too, Jeremy, I think, has talked about this a lot with campaign to opportunity. Focus less on just getting a bunch of MQLs, but more about, okay, are you engaging the buying group, the complete buying group, so that you can create new opportunities, net new opportunities with multiple people, multiple key personas from that buying group. And are you also expanding buying group members on existing opportunities where we've been missing key people for sales to work that deal? Pipeline stays the same.
So this is really interesting stuff, and I think as you go and you're doing the roadshows and you're talking to people, it is a change from how they're doing things, and like anything, change is really hard, right? So what does that internal change management look like going forward with the field and marketing campaign teams?
Yeah, internally we've just been, doing a lot of roadshows and enablement, and we're trying to figure out, back to the buying group score, how do we make it easier for people to start changing the way they've been marketing, like doing their job day to day. And so that's where the buying group score comes in, for easier prioritization. Thinking about how we can give visibility, because you start talking about these concepts, but I think it's much easier for people to grasp, like, oh, I see that in my set of accounts, there's a huge gap with this key persona. If you can show that in a dashboard, it makes it, I think, a lot easier for somebody to interpret and then decide, okay, I'm going to build this program to help try to drive engagement with that key persona. Or if you can see that you've got completeness there, but you have very low engagement here, okay, what should you be doing? What kind of channels should you be engaging with those people to try to drive that up? So I think another interesting point, I was just chatting with Jeremy, and we're even getting success externally from things like this podcast. So Jeremy said that somebody from the partner sales team, actually watched his Nectar podcast with you yesterday and reached out to him and was like, hey, I saw this. I saw what you're doing with MQLs and opportunities and buying groups, and I want to learn more about how we can get involved. So it's amazing.
I love that.
Thank you also.
Oh, absolutely. I love that. One of the most gratifying things for me personally is I believe in this transformation so much, and it's people like you and Jeremy and Eric over at Reltio who have come on to share their stories, because there are so many people who I think are leaning in and they want to do something. To go back to what I talked about earlier, like they know that the existing individual lead MQL is just so ineffective, but they don't have a better way of doing it, so they just cling on to these old methods. And part of it is because they can't not measure things. And so at least the MQL, while it's flawed, they can measure it. And I think what you all are doing in bringing this great thought leadership is there is a better way to measure this, and you're helping companies make that move and make that transition. So thank you for joining and sharing your stories. So to that point, my question is, as you're doing the road shows, and this is related to the change management piece, to tell people, hey, deprioritize the MQL. Bring in the people that don't score up. That's really important. Think about campaign to opportunity, not campaign to how many MQLs we get. That's a change, and they might be measured on the old way, and you're making recommendations towards the new way. So curious, like what pushback you get, or alternatively, has the groundwork already been laid with maybe the management to be like, this is how we're going to do it, so don't worry about that change. We'd love to hear a little more about that.
Right now, I think the trickiest part is, like you said, changing people's targets. And marketing is just like sales, where their comp plan is really going to drive their behavior. So if you put a top line target of MQLs, that's what they're going to focus on. And they're going to come to us. They come to us and they ask us, hey, can you change the scoring model so that I can get more MQLs? I'm like, okay, well, more MQLs, is that really what you're trying to do? Or are you actually trying to deliver more pipeline that closes this bookings gap that we have?
Yep.
And if that's the case, then I don't think adjusting our scoring model to fit your requirement for more MQLs is really going to do that if those MQLs never actually convert into any opportunities. So a lot of this it's not hard, it's actually quite simple, but yeah, I think the targets that people have obviously drives a lot of behavior. So we have a lot of people who say, yeah, I understand it, why haven't we been doing this all along? And my answer is, again, because we haven't been targeting the teams in this way.
Yeah. So what's been your biggest surprises as you've gone out and talked to the teams and done the road shows? Any surprises, good or bad, that you've experienced?
Pleasantly, everybody is like, yeah, this makes so much sense. Again, like, why haven't we been doing this all along? But then it gets to the question of, okay, well, actually making this change in your day-to-day, that's the tricky part. And understanding, even for them, where do they get started, right? You ask a lot about, like, for this transformation in marketing operations, how do you get started? I think a lot of our marketers now, campaigns team, fields teams are saying, okay, well, where do I get started with this? And that's really what we're trying to figure out now, is how do we build some activation playbooks, like make it really easy for them to define their target audience, but then what do you do with that audience? And that's really where we're going, I think, in this next fiscal year is, we do kind of multi-channel marketing today. Some of it's, pieced together, but how can we really transform that into more of omni-channel, and how can we leverage all these buyer signals and what we're doing here to align with that transformation as well, to become more of a dynamic, integrated, omni-channel marketing team. And that's where I think the buying groups plays a critical role in that, and we haven't solved it yet.
Yeah, it's just to get people, the way that people work is a hard thing to do. And you're one of the people on the sphere, here, the tipping point. Like, you're doing this, there's no playbook that exists, right? You're experimenting and seeing what's working and refining and so on and so forth. So when I was at Forrester, I sat in on the session where you and Jeremy spoke with Terry, and the room was 100% packed. In fact, they ran it twice because they couldn't fit everyone the day before in the regular scheduled session. And I saw the lines afterward of people that wanted to talk with you and Jeremy. And I'm sure you probably get hit up on LinkedIn with people asking questions. What, after you present and people come up to you, what's the most common questions that you get?
Yeah, there's a few. One is definitely like, how do you get leadership buy-in? How do you get alignment to get going? The answer there is simply like show results. I think all leaders just want to see very quantitative results. And then I would remind people that you can't just show the pilot results, you got to extrapolate the full impact, because that's actually a mistake we made. We went to our CMO and we said, hey, look, this is working, and it was like a cute number. And he was like, okay, can you show me a bigger number here? And we're like, okay, yes, let's go back to our data science team, let's look at the past 4 quarters worth of bookings data, and if we had these pilot results like against those numbers, what would that look like? And that was where we got into the hundreds of millions of dollars of impact. And that really grabs attention. So that's one of the questions. There's a few more if you want me to cover those.
I would love to, yeah, because when I speak with people, they want to do this, and they're like, I get it. I inherently believe this is what we should be doing. I just can't get the right alignment. Even to start the pilot, how do I get the approval to change some of the processes? And so we'd love to dig in a little bit more on that.
Yeah, that is a common one. Like, how do you just get started? Because it seems like this behemoth of a transformation. And the main thing is starting with the people and the process. We touched on this a little bit earlier. The systems can come later. And, you know, like Reltio looks like a very different company than us. They also had their CRO who was driving this, whereas I sit as a director in a 15,000 plus person org. So yeah. I'm very much like middle management trying to drive this. And so our paths are going to look different. So I think it's just understanding that everybody's path is going to look a little bit different, which is why starting small makes a lot of sense, because when you start small, you can make incremental adjustments along the way. We're all going to have kind of the same end goal of where we're trying to get to, but it's just going to look a little bit different based on what your org looks like, who your friendlies are, who you're able to partner with, what your tech stack looks like. So I think it's just embracing the fact that, okay, everybody's on this journey, but our paths are going to all look a little bit different.
Yeah. So I want to be cognizant of time, and I want to transition to what we call the lightning round, which is a little bit more fun and personal. But before I do that, is there anything that we haven't covered yet, or questions that maybe I should have asked you about this journey that I should have, that you'd like to answer or share?
What I should have also mentioned on the how to get started is a reminder that this transformation is free. My team doesn't have a budget. We didn't also go and ask for additional budget to get this going. So again, like, it's free to get started. Work within whatever confines you have, and then just make sure that you also measure the baseline when you get started, because the results are really where you're going to be able to start getting buy-in.
Yeah. That actually, I said that probably the last question, but you just made me think of one. If I recall, when I spoke with Jeremy, when you started to do the pilot, you wanted to make some changes in the systems piece to the Salesforce side. And the Salesforce team's like, you're not touching this, right? And you had to pivot, right? You had to pivot with that and start with some manual changes that didn't affect it. But the manual changes allowed you to show some results, and before you actually had to make the changes to the system. So I just wanted to touch on that as well, and maybe you can share more about that.
Yeah. If you ask me what I'd like our systems to look like, it's not what they look like. So we ran into some hurdles. Like, one thing that Forrester recommends is using the opportunity object. And I am fully bought into the concept of using the opportunity object, a pre-pipeline opportunity object, to house these buying group members. But that just wasn't possible once we talked to sales operations, and there were too many reporting dependencies on how it was structured today, and couldn't use different record types. We had a few working sessions to try to get to that, and at the end of the day, it was like, nope, you can't use the opportunity. So we said, okay, how do we pivot? And that's where we decided, let's go with a custom object. And there are benefits to that. Using the custom object means that we have a lot more control over what fields we can add onto it. We can make adjustments to it that we wouldn't have had if we had used the opportunity. So I think it's just also, for myself, reminding myself to be in that mindset of, hey, if you hit like a hurdle, it's okay, you'll pivot, and you can see the upside of that pivot as well.
Yeah. Having the benefit of hindsight now, right? Is there anything that you would have done different that maybe would have had a little bit less challenge or less pivot? What would you have done differently, if anything?
I think, Jeremy and I were very focused on, and our team was very focused on, like, BDRs in the pilot and getting the BDRs up and running with this motion, which I think is the right move to do. But then talking with marketing and getting marketing on board with this idea came later. I think we decided that we would have run those two things in parallel, because I think we'd be a bit further along with the marketing team at this point had we done that. So that's one thing we would have done differently. I think a couple of the other things I mentioned throughout the call, like with the pilot results, actually trying to extrapolate what full scale would look like and show those results, that was a mistake that I had made that I now encourage others to not make.
Final question before we go to the lightning round. So when I speak with organizations about this, one of the biggest hurdles and challenges they have is when they go and they look at their enterprise deals that have these large buying committees inside of Salesforce, most of those opportunities have one person, right? And they don't have a good understanding. They don't have good historical data to be able to pull from to think about what does our buying group look like? How many personas do we need to have engaged? I think just getting access to that historical data is really difficult for some. Did that challenge at all? Or did you have good historical data? Did that help speed this up a little bit?
Yeah, we had enough historical data to that, again, our data science team, we're lucky to have a data science team that uses the past 2 years of opportunity data to then determine who are the key personas, and then we wait, they're weighted. So even if there's like a long list with a long tail, let's focus on the top 5. So again, not like boiling the ocean where you don't need to cover every single persona. Like your buying group, pick like the top 5. And then just with roles, maybe you just have a decision maker and an influencer. You can keep it simple. But what I think has helped us have even better data, because we run this model every 6 months and update it, is when we turned on the lean data, lead contact opportunity matching, because that very quickly you're able to automate adding new people, new contacts to opportunities. So the number of people on those opportunities starts growing, and that gives you better data. So I think if you didn't know yet, I would turn that on first and let that run for 6 months and then see where you're at and see if that gives you some better results.
This is fantastic. This is really great pragmatic advice. So let's transition to the lightning round, which is a little bit more fun. The first question I would start with is, where do you turn to for advice and inspiration?
Yeah, maybe more like on the professional side, I would say it's great that my husband is in sales, so he's an account exec, and it's so helpful being in marketing and having somebody on the sales side to bounce ideas off of, because I think we have a lot of terminology. You know, I remind my team often to like, how would you explain this to your spouse or like your parents, right? I think we use a lot of industry, like marketing terminology, and I think a lot of sellers just talk in plain English because they talk to customers and they talk in plain English. So I find that really helpful in terms of advice. I'd say inspiration, I'm going to come back to like my own company, because I've been at this company for over 10 years, luckily different countries, so I think I've gotten kind of different looks within the company. But the cybersecurity industry is so innovative, so disruptive, so it's kind of leaning into that, and that kind of forces you to, if you didn't already have it, you better quickly like adopt that sort of disruptive mindset of status quo isn't good enough and you need to keep thinking about the next thing and be ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I agree. I've been in sales for my entire career, and this whole idea of a buying group is like, from a salesperson's perspective, you're like, yeah, this is what we do, right? We multi-thread and we get multiple people involved. So like the concept is really simple. It's the change in the way we've always done things, which is the hard part. Okay, so next question is, you work on some really fun, transformative things. What's the favorite part of your job?
I mean, projects like this. Like at the end of the day, in marketing operations, you're going to have a lot of the like run the business items, but these sort of transformation projects are the coolest part, because I feel like you actually get to see 6 months, 12 months, 18 months later, you look back and you can see the progress, you can see the impact that it's had on the business. Like big numbers are fun. I started out my career as an analyst, so I'm very into numbers. And these are the types of things that make me excited about coming to work and doing new things. And yeah, so that's what I'd say, these types of projects, which, sorry, I kind of gave you the answer that was in your question.
No, that's perfectly fine. There's always a flip side to that question though, right? Which is, what's really hard about your job, or what's your least favorite part of the job?
Yeah, for anybody who's in marketing operations listening, I would say it's the fire drills that we all know exist and probably pop up way too often. So, yeah, like fire drills, those are the things that I don't enjoy. But they're part of the job, so you do them. But yeah, that's the piece that I dislike the most.
Yeah. Nope, nobody likes working late Friday nights, but it's just part of the marketing operations profession. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. I've got actually two more questions. One is, when you're not at work focused on marketing operations, what do you like to do outside of work? How do you decompress?
Yeah, this has definitely shifted over the past year because I had a son who turned 1 last week. So I spend a lot of time with him. I think the coolest part is, I guess all parents go through this, but you start to see the world differently again.
Yes.
Or it's like new again, and so you go for a walk and it's like, oh, this wonderful big tree, and you didn't notice it, but he notices it, so then you sit and notice it. Or like a big dog, and you're like, okay, like another dog, but he's fascinated by it. And so I think that's the really fun part, and like really it's helped me slow down, because I think everybody in the tech industry just moves so quickly, and I don't know, it sounds very cliche, but stop and smell the roses, and it's something that you hear all the time, but I feel like now I'm actually doing it. Like I literally smell roses now on walks, which is fun.
So I have a 6-year-old daughter, and my son's going to be 4 next month, and that is so true. Like just the way they observe things, the way they see things, we just take it for granted, right? And it is so fun to just see the world from their perspective. Or even the holidays are so much different, right? Like it's not just the family getting together, it's the excitement that you had as a kid that you forgot about, but now you're experiencing through your children. So it's wonderful.
Yeah. So I would say that's that, but I do have other hobbies too, or I did before he arrived. I like tennis, I like soccer, I like to read and travel, which is like a very big bonus of living in London. Being an American living in London, it's like easy access to cool countries.
What's been your favorite vacation or place that you visited?
I still think Greece. I could go back to Greece over and over again. It's beautiful, people are nice, the food is great, and you can eat as much of it as you want, and you don't gain weight because it's that Mediterranean diet.
Yeah. I have never been, but it's on our bucket list, so we'd love to go. So, okay, last question, and we may have covered off on this earlier, but is there any parting advice that you would give to other marketing operations leaders who are listening to this podcast, or maybe have listened to you speak before, who knows that there's a better way, who knows that there's a lot of inefficiency, they're being asked to do more, but they can't figure out how to sell this internally? Again, we've covered it earlier, but is there any parting thoughts?
Yeah, my parting thoughts on this would be, again, lean into the friendlies. Those are the people you want to partner with. Those are the people that will make this much easier to get started quickly and see results quickly. But what I haven't mentioned, and I want to mention, is that none of this would have been possible without my team. They're fantastic. They've got that disruptive mindset that I mentioned earlier. They question the status quo. They look for ways to break the mold, do things differently, and they just get things done. You got to have the strategy, but you also have people that just do things and execute. So I would say make sure that you've got a team of those people. Hire those people, because it's much easier to drive this change when you've got that great team alongside you.
Yeah, wonderful advice. So, Lauren, I just want to say this has been an excellent conversation. Thank you for sharing and continuing to share your great thought leadership in this topic and in this space. I look forward to getting to know you better in future conferences. But thank you again for your time, and that's another episode of the Revenue Lounge. So thanks so much, everyone, for listening. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.